and welcome to Inside Out Southwest, stories and investigations from where you live.
Go.
Tonight, a search for heroes, finding the last resting place of the makeshift minesweepers.
This is the last piece of the World War I wrecks that have not been found in Falmouth. It's just nice to have that complete.
Also tonight, we investigate the tragic consequences of mental health misdiagnosis.
It's hard to live with what I'm dealing with day in, day out, and I just want a chance to be better. I just want a chance to live a normal life.
And the Dorset town that has it all, except young people.
The house prices are pretty much through the roof.
Why is Bridport so old?
People are spotting how great Bridport is, and they're moving here to retire, and then they're living longer than ever.
I'm Gemma Woodman, and this is Inside Out Southwest.
In a quiet backwater on the Foul Estuary, a team of divers is preparing to investigate a mystery, one that's puzzled historians since the First World War. They're trying to find the last resting place of 11 men who died protecting this stretch of coast. They weren't soldiers or full-time sailors, but fishermen.
This is the little-known story of the British trawlermen who, during the First World War, became minesweepers. They were a band of men who would pay a huge price for their bravery.
Just as it is today, in 1914, Falmouth was a vital deep-water port in a strategic position for ships navigating Atlantic trade routes. To challenge Britain's superior naval power, the Germans produced thousands of U-boats. They were effective as torpedo boats, but even more deadly as mine layers, leaving highly explosive charges in British shipping lanes. Britain responded by pressing more than 400 trawlers into service as makeshift minesweepers. They were small, manoeuvrable, and their crews knew local waters. But this was a new type of warfare. There was no handbook or training.
Where they knew there was a minefield, you would send out these ships in pairs with effectively ropes strung between them with knots along the length of the rope. And the idea was that this would then catch the mooring of the mine. And once you know you've snagged something in it, the ships would steer in parallel in a zigzag, thus forcing the mine cable between two knots until eventually it would be severed and it could be destroyed by rifle fire generally. For trawlermen, life would have been extremely tense. They really were in imminent danger at any point, and never knowing where that would come from leads to a huge build-up of tension. They have an extremely high mortality rate, so you've got nearly a 19% chance of dying doing this work, which is higher than if you're frontline infantry.
In December 1916, a Cornish trawler, the St Ives, hit a mine and sank in Falmouth Bay. All 11 crew, local trawlermen and naval reservists, were lost. One name is remembered at Kimberley Park's War Memorial in Falmouth, but the wreck of the vessel has never been found. Diver Mark Milburn and historian Dave Gibbons are now on a mission to find it, starting with the original telegram that reported the loss.
And in it, he states quite clearly that it was blown up by a mine 2 miles west-southwest of St Anthony. So we scaled off 2 miles, that's southwest, west-southwest is approximately there. So we're somewhere off of Mainport, off of Pennant's Point. Now, I've dived this area extensively in the past. I've also dived it looking for the St Ives, and I've not found any information, I've not found any parts, any pieces that are relevant.
They've also obtained a copy of the official War Office report of the sinking, and this gives the location not as west-southwest, but as south-southwest of St Anthony. Only one letter different, but more than a mile from the site where divers have been searching for nearly a century. Could it be that a simple typing error has sent generations of divers to the wrong place.
And what would you expect to see of the St Ives?
Well, the main thing probably would be boiler parts.
Which is going to be a
boilers
small,
and parts, it's going to be a small boiler.
Yeah.
Small plates with lots of holes in it. If it's intact, it's probably only going to be 5-6 foot long, maybe 4 foot diameter.
Yeah.
If the team's theory is correct, there's a challenge in store. There's already a known and significant wreck at this newly identified site. In 1940, an oil carrier, the Caroni River, hit a mine in Falmouth Bay. After partially sinking, she was still a hazard to shipping and had to be blown up by the Royal Navy. It could be that the Caroni River sank directly on top of the St Ives, and the divers will have to search for clues underneath this massive wreck. Or the explosion to sink her may have mangled both ships together.
What we do is we accrue ever more convincing evidence from the artefacts, from features such as the size of the boiler, which would be typical of this type of ship, of the sort of small trawler we're looking at, to the way that it was constructed, if we can find plating, whether it was welded or riveted, to potentially finding brass objects that might have manufacturers' names on, something that would distinguish it from the wreck that we think folded over it during the Second World War, and we're moderately confident we can do that.
It's important to me because it's a lost wreck in Falmouth. We have 11 people died. They're in service to their country during World War I. It's 100 years ago. But this is not an old wreck. This is almost like the last piece of the World War I wrecks that have not been found in Falmouth. And it's just nice to have that complete.
Convinced that the two ships have sunk on the same site, the team heads out to Falmouth Bay.
We're in the middle of the wreckage now, because obviously it's spread out over a long area. I just want to go to the most northerly part.
Can wreckage from the St Ives be found among the remains of the Caroni River, a ship nearly 4 times its size? The divers soon find the wreck of the Caroni River. The site is more than 100 metres across, the twisted metal evidence of the huge explosion that sent her to the seabed. Decades of tides, corrosion, silt and marine life have taken their toll on the site. It's going to be hard to distinguish the wreckage from 2 different ships. And midway through their dive, Mark and the team encounter another problem. Over the years, hundreds of metres of trawler nets have snagged on the wreck. The site is covered in tons of netting. Cutting it away so the divers can see what's beneath could take weeks. Frustrated, the divers return to the surface. They've only searched a small area of the wreck site, but they're optimistic, convinced the wreckage of the St Ives is down there somewhere.
It could be under the net, it could be anywhere. This is a massive ship. At 7,800 tonnes, it's 139 metres long. Yeah, it's a massive thing. It's there somewhere. It's just exactly pinpointing it we weren't able to do today.
It's late summer, and the divers are once again heading out into Falmouth Bay. Another dive team has told Mark about a separate section of wreck, south of the main area they've been diving so far. Satellite navigation takes the team straight to the spot.
We've covered that bit so well now, I'm thinking that it's got to be in this piece.
Finding this separate section of the Caroni River should be easy. Finding the wreck of the much smaller St Ives will be much harder.
Two, one, go.
Mark's years of experience of wreck hunting suggest that the ship's boilers often provide the clue. The St Ives would have been powered by a small coal-powered steam boiler. The Caroni River, an oil carrier, would have had diesel engines. And just minutes into the dive, Mark finds what he's been looking for. the distinctive end plates of exactly the type of steam boiler that would have powered the St Ives. The holes in these distinctive perforated slabs of steel would have held the rods that heated the water to make steam. This wreckage could never have been from the Caroni River. Mark's convinced that this is the last resting place of the St Ives and her crew.
Good to see it, yes. I'm so glad we found it at last. It's taken a while to find it. It's such a big area to search. It's just nice to actually find it at last.
Among the wreckage, Mark's even found coal that might have fueled the steam boiler.
This is coal. It's right next to where the boiler was.
They'll visit the wreck one more time to pay their last respects to the 11 who died in a bloody but forgotten chapter of the First World War.
It's just nice to have found it at last. It could have taken forever. And I mean, we still haven't seen the whole wreck. So I'm very happy that we found it, and I'm convinced that it is the St Ives.
Next tonight, we head to West Dorset and a place once voted by BBC viewers as one of the top 10 best market towns in Britain. But if it's that good, why are so many young people moving out? We sent our reporter Claire Jones to find out.
A stone's throw from the world-famous Jurassic Coast lies beautiful Bridport. Who wouldn't want to live here?
Now I'm sort of like retired, not doing any work, and I've got my bus pass, and I can just jump on the bus to Bridport.
We love it, and we're trying to enjoy our last years as much as we possibly can whilst we've got the opportunity.
Like the buildings, like the mentality, and hopefully my car won't get broken into. That's what I like about Bridport.
And you can see their point. Bridport has a lot to offer. The town and its historic harbour at West Bay are showcased by some of the best scenery in the southwest. The place is steeped in history. Its rope and net making dates back to at least the 13th century. It's easy to see why so many sing Bridport's praises. And yet, like West Dorset as a whole, the town is facing something of an economic crisis, a crisis rooted in the changing shape of its population. More than 1 in 3 people here are over 65. That's forecast to grow to nearly 1 in 4 in the next 20 years. What's happening is people are spotting how great Bridport is, and they're moving here to retire, and then they're living longer than ever. But that's only part of what's going on here. Rob Waugh is Bridport born and bred. He works at a local pub and is settled here. But it's reckoned 3,000 people of working age are going to move out of Dorset over the next 10 years. And Rob's 14-year-old son Eli might end up being one of them. What's it like to grow up in a town that's got quite a lot of older people living in it?
Well, it does feel like it almost feels to be fair, very, very slow, especially on a market day. I mean, it probably is why there's so many coffee shops and hairdressers in Bridport.
The cost of housing here is already on Eli's radar.
The house prices are pretty much through the roof. I mean, Bridport has one of the highest house average prices in the country.
If the house prices were lower, if there weren't so many people buying second homes just to have somewhere to holiday, I think Bridport would be better for people of the young, like late teens, early 20s. I know I work with quite a few, and a lot of them have said sort of like, I might have to move away, even just like across the border to up around Yeovil way. It's so much cheaper.
The average price of a house in these parts is £290,000. That's an eye-watering 13 times the average salary. Councils are trying to tackle the housing crisis by building more homes quicker, and more than 700 new homes have been planned for these fields, with a third of them being affordable. But whether they actually get built is another matter. The scheme's being fiercely opposed by some local people who say it'll destroy this landscape. Such arguments are nothing new, as Rob knows well.
I can't see any sort of future job-wise. more the present way it's going anyway.
37 years ago, Rob was filmed for a documentary about the changing face of his hometown.
I'm hoping to move away from Bridport. It's not really sort of anything for the young people. It's boring, there's nothing you can do. Sort of, I think that's why most people turn to vandalism type thing. It's because they've got nothing better to do, so they think, oh, we'll make our own entertainment.
More and more retirees were moving in, pushing up the cost of housing. Unemployment was heading for 12%. It was a tough time to be a teenager.
All there's to do is either go down to the youth club and play badminton or pool or something, or stay at home mainly, unless, of course, you know, you got the money to go in the pub.
Young Rob escaped to London, but not for long.
I thought London, the big city, would be bright lights, you know, all this, and it wasn't what I thought or what I'd hoped. But yeah, I came back and realised what I'd missed in the first place.
This is where Rob eventually found work as a young man, the town's biggest employer, then and now. The business has changed hands over the years, but nets and ropes have been made on the site for generations. These days, it's high-tech stuff. The military is a big customer, and so the business needs graduate engineers, exactly the sort of young people who could boost Bridport's economy.
For us, we have to offer them good packages, and we're trying to offer them good benefits, and we're trying to get them to come and actually visit the facility and see what we do and what the company's about. And actually getting them here is quite hard. Once they're here, we stand a good chance of attracting them. But it's a difficult environment, especially to get young, skilled, highly skilled engineers, because there's a lot of good opportunities elsewhere in the country.
The firm's engineering manager is a Bridport native.
It's hard to get rented accommodation for sure, so again a graduate would be looking for that. But because of the summer tourist trade, it's quite difficult to get something where they can get a long-term let. So that's definitely tricky, and then obviously the house prices are not cheap down here, so that's just another off-putting side of moving to the southwest.
If Bridport owes its past to one kind of net, maybe its future is in another. This was the town's old library. Now it's a beautifully restored cafe and shared workspace. It's home to Crowdfunder, a high-profile internet-based business that helps good causes raise money. Founder Simon Deverill wants to raise interest in Bridport too.
We need to be part of that attraction of other businesses coming and seeing what we're doing here, and making that decision or realisation that, you know, you can run a digital business, you can run a leading digital business from anywhere outside of one of the major cities around the UK. And I think by us being here, we can attract other businesses to come and do the same thing here.
Nobody wants the town to die. We've got to keep it fresh, and we've got to keep people motivated, and hope that, you know, when young people do leave for whatever experiences they're leaving for, they will come back and bring that knowledge and experience back to the town and share it with other people.
And that's exactly what Rob Waugh hopes for young Eli.
He's had a really good start in life, teaching-wise and that. So it's now very much the ball's in his court to do what his heart wants to do. So if he had to move away, then yeah, I'd support him while he did that, as any parent would.
It's a condition that far more of us suffer from than you may think, and it carries a high risk of suicide. Borderline personality disorder is often misdiagnosed, misunderstood and stigmatised. As the government pledges more money for mental health services, both patients and clinicians say it's time for change.
Joanna from West Devon has been struggling with mental health issues for years. She's experienced huge mood swings, often linked with problems in relationships.
I've been treated for depression for as long as I can remember, which at times has sort of had that numbing effect and helped me get through. But I knew that wasn't the whole issue, that wasn't the whole problem.
At times, the depth and intensity of her mood swings have brought on dark thoughts and dangerous behaviour.
It's really exhausting. You know, I'm not just feeling like this occasionally. Usually it's all day, every day. I'm battling with different emotions, and sometimes I don't even know what my emotions are. They're just so overwhelming. And obviously there have been times that I've thought about, I just can't live like this. I just can't live like this anymore. Just day in, day out, being this tired, this exhausted.
After years of taking antidepressants, Joanna researched her symptoms herself, and after seeing a sympathetic GP, was finally diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. It's often marked by attachment issues, like Joanna has. It's thought BPD affects 1 in 100 of us. Amongst the most serious sufferers, there's an estimated 7 to 10% suicide risk. A recognised effective treatment is something called dialectical behaviour therapy, or DBT, a form of intense one-to-one counselling. But instead, Joanna was offered a self-help course.
Basically, they referred me to a support group, and it was self-help. There was nothing about the DBT. There was no intensive therapy that I was kind of expecting from what I'd sort of read and heard about. It's hugely frustrating. And it's really difficult to know that there is stuff out there, but to feel like, oh, you can't really cure it and things like that. But there is proof that this treatment can help. But I just want that opportunity to be able to make myself better and just live a better life.
Long waits are one issue. Misdiagnosis is another problem. One thing that's not thought to help people with BPD is going into hospital. Consultant psychiatrist Andy Montgomery left the NHS last year. He believes the BPD diagnosis is often wrongly used as a way of managing access to expensive emergency beds.
I've used the expression psychiatry's dirty little secret to describe a phenomenon which occurs by clinical staff making a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder as a justification for not admitting people to hospital. This is arising in the context of there being tremendous pressure on beds in the NHS mental health services at the moment. There simply aren't enough beds to support the people that need them. Clinicians look for reasons to justify not admitting patients to hospital. One of the reasons that they can use is to make a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, because we know that people with that diagnosis don't always do well in hospital. Unfortunately, the diagnosis is being used inappropriately, in my view, inaccurately, which is leading to people who may benefit from admission to hospital being excluded from services.
Carol was diagnosed with BPD last year, but with a medical background herself, she wasn't convinced they'd got the right diagnosis.
When I went in to see the doctor initially, they diagnosed me with borderline personality disorder, and I think I felt like actually before I even went in they had an idea about what they thought of me before I went there. I didn't feel like I was listened to. And then when I came away from the appointment and I received a letter summarising the appointment, giving me the diagnosis, it actually had incorrect information on the letter, for example, around self-harm and other things that I'd actually not had and symptoms that I didn't have.
After a year with the BPD diagnosis, Carol was told that she had bipolar or manic depression. It's a different condition from BPD. It's also marked by mood swings, but they tend to be much longer in duration. And there's a hyperactive or extended manic phase that tends not to happen with BPD.
Sadly, this doesn't always happen accurately. The diagnosis is sometimes made inaccurately, and I have actually witnessed in my clinical experience at least many occasions actually when people have experienced harm as a result of having the wrong diagnosis, and on at least 2 occasions of people who have died following incorrect attribution of a diagnosis of borderline personality disorder, and as a result have been excluded from mainstream services.
Carol is angry at her misdiagnosis.
Living with the wrong diagnosis just meant that I didn't get the correct treatment, which meant that I kind of had extreme mood swings for those 2 years, swinging between episodes of mania and episodes of severe depression, which affected my behaviour and the way that I lived my life, which then impacted on kind of every aspect of my life, really. and the treatment for borderline personality disorder doesn't at all treat bipolar. So even though I was having that, it didn't actually treat or solve anything that was going on for me.
Carol's now on medication which controls her symptoms, and she's able to hold down a responsible job. Here at Oxford University's Department of Psychiatry, they're researching both BPD and bipolar to try and improve diagnosis between the two and work towards more effective treatment. Dr. Kate Saunders was part of a team that looked at how consultants diagnosed the condition.
What we found was that in routine clinical assessments, clinicians were not applying all of the diagnostic criteria for the disorders that they were assessing. Despite that, many of them were still happy to make a diagnosis. Now, it's not to say that the diagnosis was right or wrong, but it was very difficult to know what that was based upon. And of course, for patients, getting the diagnosis right and understanding it is really key in their engagement with any subsequent treatment, their understanding of their difficulties and ensuring they get a treatment that's evidence-based.
Kate's team is now looking into the two mood disorders. Volunteers, some healthy, some with BPD and some bipolar, were asked to complete a regular mood survey on a smartphone app. At the same time, their sleep patterns and activity levels were monitored by a wristwatch. Healthy people on the left-hand graph showed clear periods between midnight and 6 when they were asleep. Those with BPD on the right-hand graph showed much more random periods of activity and rest.
And what we found for people with borderline personality disorder is they can be very clearly distinguished on the basis of the variability of their mood as reported using a smartphone, but also they have a very distinctly disturbed pattern of sleep, very distinct from healthy people and very distinct from other psychiatric disorders too. Well, that's a really interesting one because it's specific to the diagnosis, but actually it's something one might be able to treat and really specifically target. And perhaps most importantly, sleep is something that people with personality disorder report as a problem. So it actually links, right the way through to the patient experience and enables us to do something new that has the potential to really change things.
Back in Devon, Joanna still has little idea of when she'll get the therapy she says is long overdue.
I feel like I've got so much potential. My family, my friends, they love me, they care about me, they don't want to see me throwing my life away. But it's hard to live with what I'm dealing with day in, day out, and I just want a chance to be better. I just want a chance to live a normal life.
From clinicians and sufferers alike, the plea is for both greater understanding of and greater resources for this complex, disabling condition. With mental health higher than ever before on the political agenda, they hope that at long last the condition attracts the funding needed for effective diagnosis and treatment.
And that's all from us for this week, but join us again next week when we revisit some of our best stories of 2018. I'll see you then.
In fact, Inside Out will be back in 2 weeks' time.